Let me start with the night I almost lost everything. Not the company, not the money, not the reputation I had spent 15 years carving into the world like it was stone and I was something permanent. I almost lost me. And the terrifying part? I didn't even notice it was happening. I was sitting in a glass office on the 43rd floor of a building I had willed into existence through sheer obsession. 312 employees, 11 figures in valuation. My name on the door in letters big enough to read from the street. I had a car that cost more than my childhood home. I had a watch that could fund a small school in a developing country. I had a calendar so packed with purpose that I hadn't looked at the sky, just looked at it for no reason, for no meeting, for nothing, in over 4 years. And I was sitting there at 2 a.m, the city humming below me like a machine that never sleeps, and I realized something so quiet and so devastating that I almost missed it. I didn't know who I was without all of this. Wait. Before you scroll, I need you to stay with me here, because I know you, I know what you're carrying, I know the way you check your phone first thing in the morning before you've even decided how you feel about the day. I know the way you've built your worth out of what you produce, what you achieve, what others can point to and say, see, he matters, see, she's going somewhere. I know the way you've learned to be impressive before you've allowed yourself to be honest. I know, because I was the architecture of that life, and this is what I learned inside it. I built a morning routine that started at 4:45, cold shower, journaling, meditation, exercise, all before the sun had the nerve to show up. I built a body that looked like discipline incarnate. I built a mind that processed faster than most rooms I walked into. I built a reputation that preceded me like a herald. I built meetings that generated millions. I built a presence so controlled, so calibrated, so relentlessly on, that I could walk into any room in the world and feel the air shift when I arrived. I built all of that. And I built a life that felt, on the inside, like a museum after closing time. Beautiful, orderly, immaculate, and completely empty of any living thing. I thought achievement was the antidote to fear. If I could just get far enough ahead, accumulate enough evidence of my own value, build something undeniable, then I wouldn't have to feel the thing I had been running from since I was 7 years old, sitting in a kitchen while my father looked at a report card and said nothing, just nothing. The silence that teaches a child you are only worth what you produce. I thought love was something you earned through performance. I thought connection was a reward for excellence. I thought people who needed people were people who hadn't worked hard enough on themselves. I thought being needed felt better than needing, and so I built a fortress, beautiful from the outside, impenetrable. And I stood inside it completely alone, surrounded by accomplishments, and told myself that this was strength. Tell me something. When was the last time someone sat with you, not to fix you, not to advise you, not to celebrate you or use you or need something from you, but just sat with you, just existed in your orbit without agenda, without performance, without the unspoken transaction that underlies so many human relationships? When was the last time you let someone do that? When was the last time you felt safe enough to stop being impressive? I'll wait, because I think for a lot of us, and I mean the ones who are driven, the ones who are building something, the ones who learned early that the world rewards output and punishes vulnerability, I think for a lot of us, that moment is so far in the past, we've started to believe it doesn't exist anymore. We've started to believe that intimacy is a luxury, that presence is a productivity loss, that being known, really known, the parts underneath the achievement, the parts we don't show in interviews or post on platforms, that being known is a risk we simply cannot afford to take. Because what if they see it and they leave? What if the real version of us isn't enough? That question is a prison. And I lived in it for 15 years. She didn't try to break the door down. I want to be careful here, because this isn't a story about a woman saving a man. That's not what happened. That's not what this is. She wasn't a fantasy or a rescue or some cinematic arrival that made everything suddenly make sense. She was just real. Relentlessly, uncomfortably, beautifully real. She asked me, about 3 weeks into knowing each other, while we were sitting in a parking lot after dinner, not going anywhere, just sitting because neither of us had said the thing that needed to be said. She asked me what I was actually afraid of, not what challenges I faced, not what obstacles I was navigating, not what my 5-year vision was or what I was optimizing for in the next quarter. What was I afraid of? And I laughed. The way you laugh when you haven't been asked a real question in so long that the question itself feels foreign. The way you laugh when you're stalling because somewhere in your chest a door just rattled on its hinges and you don't have a protocol for that. She didn't laugh back. She just waited. That woman waited with the patience of someone who understood that the most important things don't arrive on schedule. And I sat there in that parking lot, city lights bleeding through the windshield, and for the first time in 15 years I opened my mouth and told the truth. I told her I was afraid that none of it was real. That the version of me everyone admired was a construction, a very sophisticated, very expensive, very convincing construction, and that the actual me, the one underneath all the optimization and the output, and the identity I had scaffolded around achievement, I wasn't sure that person was worth anything to anyone. I told her I was afraid that if I stopped moving, stopped producing, stopped being useful, the people around me would simply drift away. Because I had chosen relationships my entire life that confirmed this. I had built a social world where I was the engine and everyone else was a passenger, and I had told myself that was leadership. That was strength. That was what it meant to be the kind of man who provides. I told her I hadn't asked for help in so long that I wasn't sure I knew how anymore. And she looked at me, not with pity, not with that particular softness people use when they're about to say something designed to make you feel better, without actually touching what's broken. She looked at me with something I can only describe as recognition, like she had been waiting for that version of me to show up. Like she had known he was in there and she had simply been creating a space where it was safe to breathe. Here's what I learned. The most dangerous story a high-achieving person tells themselves is that they don't need. That needing is weakness. That self-sufficiency is the highest form of character. That the summit is somewhere you arrive alone. It's not weakness to need. It is the most human thing there is. And the version of strength that forbids it is not strength at all. It is armor. An armor, worn long enough, stops protecting you and starts imprisoning you. I'd been wearing mine so long I had forgotten what my own skin felt like. She stayed. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Not in spite of what I showed her, but after. She stayed after the parking lot conversation. She stayed after the morning I woke up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, convinced I had made every wrong decision in my life, and sat on the edge of the bed trying to breathe like a man who had forgotten how lungs work. She stayed after the dinner where I canceled on her twice and showed up late the third time, offered a very polished, very rational explanation that was really just the language of someone who doesn't believe they deserve to be shown up for. She didn't perform loyalty. She practiced it daily, quietly, without making it a transaction. And that broke something open in me that I didn't know was sealed shut. I want to talk about presence, because I think we've confused it with something smaller than it is. Presence is not just being in the room. I was in 1,000 rooms. I was in boardrooms and bedrooms and living rooms and dining rooms, and I was never in any of them. Not fully. My body was there. My performance was there. My functional self, the one who could hold a conversation and make observations and be charming and incisive and everything a person is supposed to be. That version was reliably, consistently present, but I was always somewhere slightly ahead of where I was, always calculating, always optimizing, always running the next iteration of the story of my life in the background like an open tab that never closes. I was sitting across from people I loved while mentally rehearsing conversations that hadn't happened yet. I was eating meals without tasting them. I was walking through seasons without feeling the temperature change. I was living my life the way you watch a movie on fast forward. Technically, you've seen it, but you haven't experienced a single frame. She called it out, not loudly, not confrontationally. She just said one evening when I was mid-sentence about something I can't even remember now, you know, your eyes go somewhere else sometimes. Where do you go? And I didn't have an answer, which was itself an answer. Look at me for a second. I'm not talking to the version of you that has it together. I'm talking to the one underneath. The one who woke up this morning and felt, just for a moment, the weight of the gap between who you are and who you perform. I see you, the one who says I'm fine so automatically it doesn't even feel like a lie anymore. The one who has become so good at being functional that you've started to mistake functioning for living. The one who built a life that looks from the outside like everything is working, and who knows quietly, intimately, in the 3 a.m. hours when the noise dies down, that something essential is missing. I see you because I was you. And I want to tell you something that took me 41 years and one woman who refused to be impressed by my performance to understand. The life you've built outside of yourself will never fill what's hollow inside of it. Never. No achievement, no acquisition, no validation, no title, no number in an account, no applause from a room full of people who know your name but not your story. Nothing that exists outside of you can live inside of you. Here's what I learned about the bricks. I built an empire, brick by brick, year by year, choice by deliberate choice. I was meticulous, I was precise, I was, by any measurable standard, extraordinary at the construction. And the empire was real. I'm not saying it wasn't. I'm not telling you that ambition is a lie, or that achievement is hollow, or that success is an illusion. I worked for what I built, and it stands and it matters. But I built the empire before I had built the foundation. I built the cathedral before I had built the altar, and when the wind came, and it always comes, at some point the wind always comes, the structure swayed in ways that terrified me. Because a thing that looks solid from the outside but has no core to it, no root, no honest human center that knows what it's building for and not just toward, that thing is more fragile than it looks. I was more fragile than I looked. The collapse, when it came, was not dramatic. I want to be honest about that because I think we've been sold the idea that transformation requires a catastrophe, a diagnosis, a bankruptcy, a public unraveling, something cinematic and undeniable that gives us permission to finally stop and look at ourselves. Mine was quieter than that. Mine was a Tuesday afternoon in a glass office when I looked up from a spreadsheet that represented the most successful quarter in my company's history and felt absolutely nothing. Not pride, not satisfaction, not relief, not even the residual glow of work well done. Nothing, just the quiet, devastating realization that I had optimized my way out of my own life. Don't deny it. You've had a version of that moment, maybe not as clean as mine, maybe scattered across years, maybe something you've been pushing down and walking past and pretending doesn't exist, but you felt it. The moment where the thing you worked for finally arrived and it felt like less than you thought it would. The moment where you looked at everything you'd built and felt underneath the satisfaction a current of something that felt like grief. That's not ingratitude. That's not failure. That's not a sign that something is wrong with you. That's the invitation. That hollow feeling is not your enemy. It is the most honest thing that's ever happened to you. It is your interior life knocking on the door of the fortress you built around it, asking to be let back in. She and I had a ritual. A stupid, small, incredibly ordinary ritual that I used to be slightly embarrassed by before I understood what it was doing to me. Every evening, wherever we were, whatever the day had been, we would sit together for 20 minutes and not talk about work, not talk about plans, not talk about the future or strategy or what needed to happen next. We would just talk about what we noticed, what surprised us, what moved us, something we were curious about, a memory that surfaced from nowhere. The color of the light at a certain time of day, a sentence from something we'd read, 20 minutes of pure, unstructured, unoptimized human presence. I fought it at first, literally. I would check the time. I would feel the pull of everything unfinished and unresolved and undone. I would sit there and feel the productive part of my brain straining at the leash, asking why we were wasting time we could be using. And slowly, not quickly, this is not a movie where the protagonist learns his lesson in a single scene. Slowly, I began to feel the ground under my feet again. Because that's what presence does. That's what being met does. That's what 20 minutes of choosing a person over productivity every evening for months does to a man who has spent decades choosing the opposite. It rebuilds the foundation brick by brick, choice by choice, not with fanfare, not with a revelation, with the quiet, persistent accumulation of small decisions to be here now in this, with this person, with this version of my life, without running from it or improving it or managing it, just being inside it. Here's what I learned about identity. I had built my identity on a foundation of performance. I was what I produced. I was what I achieved. I was the metric of my own output. And that version of identity is seductive. It's measurable. It's defensible. It's something you can point to when someone asks who you are. But it is also completely contingent. It requires constant maintenance, constant validation, constant proof. Because a self that is built entirely on what it does has no answer for the question of who it is when it's doing nothing. And a self with no answer for that question is a self that cannot rest, cannot stop, cannot be still. Because stillness is where the question lives and the question feels like annihilation, she said to me once, in that direct way she had that I came to love like I've loved very few things in this life. You keep showing me what you can do. I already know what you can do. I'm asking you who you are. I didn't have an answer. And so I had to go find one. The rebuilding was slow. I want to be clear about that. I want to be clear because I think a lot of content, a lot of the material we consume about growth and change and transformation implies that insight is the same as change, that once you understand the pattern, you're free of it, that naming the wound closes it. It doesn't work that way. Understanding that I had learned conditional love in childhood, that I had been taught through years of quiet reinforcement that affection was a response to performance and withdrawal was a response to falling short. Understanding that didn't undo it. It just made it visible. And making it visible was the beginning of the work, not the completion of it. The work was in the Tuesday morning when I was overwhelmed, and instead of disappearing into a 16-hour grind, I told her, I'm struggling today. I don't have a solution. I just needed to say that out loud to another human being. The work was in the board meeting where a decision went badly, and instead of immediately constructing a narrative about why it was part of the plan, I sat with my team and said, I got that wrong. Here's what I'm learning from it. The work was in learning how to receive, how to let someone bring me something without immediately calculating what it cost them or what I owed in return, how to sit with care without deflecting it into humor or analysis or a pivot to what I could give back. The work was in learning that. Asking for help was not a sign of a smaller man. It was a sign of a man who had finally gotten large enough to tell the truth. Here's what I learned about love. Real love. Not the love that lives in grand gestures or cinematic declarations or the kind of devotion that only exists in the absence of difficulty. Real love is a woman who doesn't leave when she sees the parts of you that aren't performing. Real love is someone who sits across from your fear and doesn't flinch. Who hears the thing you've never said out loud and responds not with solutions or silver linings, but with the simple, revolutionary act of still being there. Real love is being known and chosen, not despite the real version of you, not in ignorance of it, because of it. Because someone looked at the whole of you, the achievement and the armor and the 7-year-old in the kitchen waiting for a response that never came, and said yes, that. All of it. I'm not leaving. She is, in the truest sense I know how to mean it, 1 in a million. Not because she's perfect. Not because our life together is frictionless or uncomplicated or without the ordinary difficulties of two real people trying to inhabit the same life honestly, but because she chose presence over performance. Because she was patient with a man who didn't know how to be still long enough to be loved. Because she asked the questions no one else was asking. Because she held a space for the real version of me to emerge, without rushing it, without demanding it, without making her own peace contingent on my arrival. Because she stayed. I think about who I was before her. The version of me who would have watched something like this and thought, interesting, noted, moving on. The version of me who had converted every piece of human experience into data, every piece of vulnerability into weakness, every quiet moment into an optimization problem. I think about what I would have missed if I had stayed that man. Not the success. The success came anyway. The work was still there, still good, still worth doing. But the life, the actual life underneath the achievement, the morning light on her face while she's reading something and she doesn't know I'm watching. The conversation that starts about nothing and becomes the truest thing we've said to each other all week. The ordinary Tuesday evening where nothing is happening and everything is exactly right. The feeling of being in a room where you don't have to be anything, where you don't have to produce or perform or present, where you are simply, completely, mercifully allowed to exist. I almost missed all of it. I almost optimized my way right past the entire reason I was building anything in the first place. Here's what the collapse taught me. The collapse was not punishment. The collapse was mercy. The emptiness I felt in that glass office was not the beginning of my undoing. It was the beginning of my becoming. The hollow feeling was not failure. It was the invitation to build something real inside all the things I had built that were only real from the outside. The foundation was never the career. It was never the reputation or the revenue or the recognition. The foundation was the ability to be known and to survive it. The foundation was the choice, made daily, to be present in my own life. The foundation was the courage to say, I don't have it together. I never fully had it together. And I'm done pretending that I did. The foundation was her. Not because she held me up. I had to do my own standing. But because she showed me what it looked like to stand in your own truth without flinching. And because she refused to love a performance when a person was available. I rebuilt everything on top of that, not faster, not bigger, not more impressive, truer. The empire became a home. The altar was finally built. The bricks meant something now because I knew what they were for. Every choice, every morning, every difficult conversation, every moment of choosing presence over productivity. It was all in service of something real now, not a metric, not a milestone, a life. An actual human life with weight and warmth and meaning that doesn't evaporate the moment the applause stops. I learned to ask for help, slowly, imperfectly, with all the residual awkwardness of a man who had spent 4 decades convinced that needing was weakness. I learned to receive care without immediately converting it into debt. I learned to sit in a room and be in it. I learned to let a person love me, not the version of me I had carefully constructed for public consumption, but the actual version, uncertain, searching, sometimes afraid, learning, human. I learned that the most radical act available to a driven person is to stop, to be still, to let themselves be seen, and to trust that what is seen is enough. Look at me for a second. I'm not asking you to slow down. I'm not asking you to stop building. I'm not telling you that the ambition is wrong, or that the drive is a disease, or that the life you're constructing is a mistake. I'm asking you, what is it for? Not the answer you give in interviews, not the vision statement, not the 5-year plan, the real answer. The one that lives in the part of you that still knows the difference between a life that looks successful and a life that feels like yours. What is all of it for? Who are you building it with? Who knows the version of you that doesn't have it together? Who have you let in? Because here's what I know now, from the other side of the collapse, from inside the life I rebuilt on a real foundation. No one on their deathbed wishes they had spent more time being impressive. No one at the end reaches for the trophy or the valuation or the metric. They reach for the person who stayed, the person who knew them, the person who sat with them in the parking lot and waited while they found the courage to tell the truth. They reach for the relationship they were too busy or too afraid or too armored to fully inhabit while it was available. Don't wait for the end to figure out what matters. She's asleep right now as I write this. The city is doing what cities do at this hour, indifferent and continuous. And I am here, awake, writing this because I cannot sleep when I feel something this clearly, and I have finally, at 41 years old, learned to follow that feeling instead of managing it. I am here because a woman sat in a parking lot and waited while I found myself. I am here because she didn't leave when she saw what I was actually made of. I am here because the collapse was mercy and the emptiness was an invitation, and the hollow feeling in that glass office on a Tuesday night was not the end of my story. It was the last moment of the old one. I am here because I finally learned the difference between a home and an empire. I am here because I chose presence. I am here. Don't deny it. You felt something just now, something you don't feel very often, something that lives underneath the productivity and the ambition and the competence and the carefully maintained impression that you have it all under control, that something is real. Go toward it. Find the person who can sit with you in the parking lot. Be that person for someone else. Let yourself be known. Let yourself be still. Let the collapse, if it's coming, be mercy instead of catastrophe. Let the emptiness be the invitation it actually is. Build the foundation first, build the altar, then build everything else on top of it, and build it knowing what it's for. And if you already have someone who stayed, go home, tell them tonight, not tomorrow, not after the next thing is finished, not when you've earned it or figured it out or become the version of yourself you think you need to be before you're worthy of showing up completely. Tonight, walk through the door and put down the performance and say, I see you, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. And I know how rare this is, because you do, and that's enough. That has always been enough.